I'm Dan Schaubel, managing partner of Workplace Intelligence, and in this series, I talk to leaders about their perspectives on hybrid work. My guest today is Taso Du Val, CEO of Toptal, an elite network of the world's top talent in business design and technology that enables companies to scale their teams on demand. Taso, it's great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Dan.
How did Toptal originally decide to be fully remote, and how has that decision impacted hiring and retention since?
Great question. Well, we've been remote since day one, so it was a pretty natural decision given the fact that I was in Palo Alto, California, and a lot of the folks working with me were in different countries. So it didn't make sense to have an office at that point in time. This was in 2010. So it was a very natural choice for us, and it simply continued.
Yeah, it's crazy. 2010 was the first year I started working remote. What did you find were the biggest benefits and challenges, at least in the early days of working remote? And do you still have those challenges, or how have you overcome them?
Great question. Some of the challenges have been alleviated, such as organizing communication, ensuring that that happens in a way that is very fluid. We used to use Skype and some other tools that, looking back, are very antiquated. Now we use Slack. We've built a lot of our own tools on top of Slack that have integrated in Zoom, or rather with Zoom, in a very compelling way. And so we've taken care of a lot of the communication challenges that we weren't able to about 10 years ago. And so it's become significantly more fluid, significantly more organized. And that has allowed us to flourish much more so than it did 10 years ago, given the fact that we have this excellent infrastructure in place.
Yeah, you're lucky. I mean, so many companies, especially these big companies that have never had a remote workplace or never promoted remote work, they had to scramble to create a policy early on. And now, again, we're entering this whole like uncertain territory where they're trying to figure out what does hybrid work mean? How should our remote work policy evolve? But you have already had so many years, for me, 11 years doing this. So you've been able to adjust and learn new tools more easily. But don't you find that, certain, maybe generations or parents versus non-parents, people with different demographics or people in different countries, that there's differences in terms of what technologies that they want to use and what policies that can be implemented there?
Well, from my perspective, it depends on the organization. A lot of organizations have deals with Microsoft already, they have deals with Google. And so it really depends. Are you going to use Azure A, or are you going to use Google Suites? What's the choice going to be based upon the business as it currently stands? A lot of these big companies are already hamstringed in many more ways than people actually realize. And so the decision making is much more political than it is practical. And in the context of a global 2000 or Fortune 500, those decisions have sweeping ramifications insofar as affecting remote work goes. And so, if you have to choose one or the other, and for the purposes of remote work, one or the other is inferior, you're going to have an inferior work experience and therefore an inferior company. Now, I'm not going to state in large part because I actually don't know what set is the best set. I can only tell you from our experience what works very well. And some of those pieces of infrastructure that work well are pieces of infrastructure that we have developed internally to sort of glue everything together and really make it work in a very, very compelling way. So with that said, I really think it does depend on the organization. It certainly doesn't depend on really where the individual is, what country they're from, their historical background, et cetera. I think it's more so dependent upon the specific organization and what their boundaries are based on what they've already set themselves up to be.
Well said. Yeah, there's no one size fits all model. And it depends on industry, geography, who the leader is, the culture that's being created, the preferences of workers. Employee voice is becoming more and more important, especially over the past year. So those are really great points that you made. Why is adapting to remote work a stress test for corporate culture?
Well, I suppose that question is in the timely context because now it's certainly a stress test because I had to. right? And now they have the option, should we continue that? And so I think it's a stress test for different reasons at different points in time. It was a stress test in early 2020 because people had to. They didn't really have a choice. And they had to get their infrastructure in place and their organizational structure in place to be able to accommodate that. Now it's a stress test for a different reason, which is, are we going to lose our best people? And should we continue with remote work since everyone knows that's what we want, or rather that's what the best and brightest minds in this world want? Generally speaking, I would say that that's pretty definitive at this point in time. And so it depends what point in time you're talking about. But I would say for this conversation, we can likely stick with the second point, with the latter point, which is, why is it stressful for companies to make that decision now? And how do companies deal with that stress? The practical answer is to allow your employees to work remotely because it's effective and it works and everyone recognizes that in the world. And to put it bluntly, if a company states otherwise, everyone knows that they're lying. Everyone knows that. It's like being on the world stage and everyone's a jury. They're going to know you're fabricating this. It's just an absurd statement at this point in time. It can't be the truth. And so what are the other reasons for that? Well, the other reasons would be there's political pressure, there are stodgy mindsets, there are people who are just antiquated in their ways. Those are the real reasons, if you were to ask me, because it's pretty much ground truth at this point in time that remote working is more effective and more desirable than working in an office. It's very clear. And so the stress is really put on the organization, I think more so politically than anything, because the reason that they're having these challenges are almost innately and singularly political challenges. They are a CEO who's, in their 60s or 70s who doesn't believe in this, and everyone's looking at them wanting to now leave that company. And I know this firsthand because we've had executives at Fortune 100 companies, C-levels, come to me and say, Taso, I want to leave my company. Can I join your C-level? Because it's ridiculous what these people are stating, and everyone knows it's not the truth. So it's putting more so political pressure on them than I think it is business pressure, but it's starting to meld because your internal strength, of course, is representative of your business strength and the ability for any company to compete out in the market.
And it makes sense. It's very hard for a manager to say, hey, you need to be in the office 5 days a week now, because over a year and a half of successful remote working where productivity increased shows that the remote work experiment was successful, and it doesn't come at a productivity loss, actually the reverse. And everything you just said, I think, is important because it's also, when recruiting and retaining, part of the value proposition, part of what's expected now is flexibility. And remote work is part of flexibility. It's a big feature of flexibility that a lot of people experienced during COVID, right? It's like if you're not thinking about the health and well-being of your employees, which includes flexibility, then you're, not in with the times, and you're going to get passed up because talent can go everywhere. Talent's way more fluid than it ever was.
That's right.
And how do you create a value-based culture and sustain it?
Well, that's a great question. I think we've done a very good job at that. We failed at it at first, though we've taken a lot of the learnings, especially in the early days, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, and incorporated them into how we run the company today. So some of those learnings pertain to, first of all, defining what your values are very explicitly, communicating them, reinforcing them through action, both carrot and stick actions, and ensuring that that is really part of your company, that is part of your DNA in every single way. And while that term, part of your DNA, is rather abstract, it really does boil down to the actions that a company takes as it relates to those values. And so if you value transparency, for example, reward people who are transparent, punish people who are not. It's really as simple as that. The CEO, rather the previous CEO of VMware once stated, values are just a set of attributes that you reward and punish at a company. And that's really the summation of your culture. And I agree with that. In a remote work environment, however, there are some other subtle nuances that are introduced into an organization that aren't so apparent, such as the fact that in an in-office environment, you have artifacts, articles of clothing, a watch, other things, quite literally things that represent the culture. Sandals, shorts, a t-shirt, okay, that's Silicon Valley. Patek Philippe watch, a nice suit, it's probably more so Fifth Avenue. Upper West Side, Upper East Side. So there's a different sort of understanding that's associated with both. There's, of course, everything in the middle. But when you go to a law firm and you see everyone in a suit and you see the expensive watches and you see the $400 pens, you think to yourself, oh, wow, these people might take themselves a little bit too seriously. I guess that's the culture there. Likewise, one might think that in the opposite, in Silicon Valley, who are these kids running billion-dollar companies in flip-flops and sandals? Oh, I guess they don't really care so much about etiquette, so on and so forth. Now, whether there is ground truth to any of those statements, it doesn't really matter. There's some truth to those statements. And those truths, they play into your daily interactions with any of those individuals. Without them, it sort of disjoints and strips away some of the elements, at the very least, that existed previously in regards to retaining the culture. If you have a suit and a tie every day, you're going to walk in, there's going to be an element of professionalism that is just understood. You don't have to speak a word. You don't have to talk about values. You're just going to understand that by interacting with the individual and having that in-person experience with them and with your group. So it's just fact. That just happens automatically. You don't get that in a remote environment automatically. Now, what you do to make up for that is you define the values explicitly, you reward and punish in accordance, you put in components that make that feedback loop cycle operate effectively and efficiently, and it works. It's just different than how a lot of the cultural elements transpire themselves, come to reality in an in-office environment. You have to sort of, I don't want to say construct, but you have to be very explicit and intentional about them. And you have to amplify what they mean and embed them within the organization in a way that you likely didn't have to before when you were simply in an in-office environment.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard the word intentional so much over the past year. And I think remote work has put pressure on us to become more intentional about when we hold meetings, how we spend our time, the projects we do, the people we connect with. So intention is more valuable. Would you say that not having a physical office puts more pressure and more drive for creativity to emphasize corporate culture? Because part of corporate culture for a company that actually has a space is something that's physical. This, using your sight, using your smell, taste, like you get a lot of the different senses when you're in a physical office environment. And like we've found through research that people are more likely to establish trust in person versus remote. Can you talk a little about that? And then like this whole idea of favoritism from people working in the office versus remote, and the fact that since you're fully remote, there is no favoritism because everyone is remote.
Well, I'll start with your last question or your last point. And I'll challenge that because I've seen strong favoritism in a remote environment for all sorts of different reasons. Maybe one person is more productive. Maybe they come from the same background. Maybe they come from the same place and they learn that over a period of time. Though I have seen favoritism happen in a remote environment. So I definitely think that it does happen. And the remedies to solving that are pretty much the same as an in-office environment. We can go into that if we want to, but I'll just solidify that point for the time being. In regards to some of the other elements that you talked about, sight, taste, smell, sound, etc., those experiential elements of a work experience, yes, they are missing in a remote environment. Your experience is what's around you. It's your kitchen or your home office or your bedroom or whatever it may be that you're sitting in at that point in time. And it's very different for everyone. I haven't seen that affect the remote work environment so much. I suppose you could give everyone the same cologne or perfume, but I'm not sure that's really going to send positive or negative signals or really do anything of meaningful value. Um, I suppose I'd like to actually get your take on what you've seen as those experiential elements have done for companies. Have you heard from any leaders that it's been positive, negative, that they miss the smell of the office or the taste of the cafeteria food? I
I
haven't
think,
heard that.
yeah, I think it goes, honestly, I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier on. This is different for every company. It works for certain people, it doesn't work for other people, works for some companies, doesn't work for other companies. And clearly this has worked for you. You might have some employees that are begging to go back to the office because they're extroverts and they miss their colleagues, because they're used to seeing them for the past 5 years, right? So it really depends, and that's why everyone I talk to, it's slightly different. But the more and more I talk to leaders like you who are fully remote and have been for a decent period of time, clearly it's worked really well. And obviously it saved money on real estate costs. Obviously it allows you to recruit talent from anywhere. So there are so many benefits, especially the ones you listed. I think one of the big challenges that companies have that were not fully remote is onboarding. So I'd love to talk about what are some of the ways to introduce new employees to your company if you aren't physically present with them.
That's a great question. We have exceptional onboarding, and I know that only because we've had quite senior folks from Microsoft, Google, Facebook, and many other companies join us. And they've all said it's the best onboarding experience they've ever experienced. We just had an executive join us from a Fortune, I believe, 200 in the last week. And they said that it was by far the best onboarding experience they've ever had in their entire career. And so,
So now you have to describe that experience.
yeah, I can describe it for sure. The experience has to do with capturing how the organization operates and communicating that to somebody during the onboarding process through video, through, let's say, learning and development like processes, and sort of inculcating those individuals into the, in our case, Toptal experience, and taking them through what it's like. Who am I? Who's our general counsel? Who's the person you're going to be working with? Capturing that and then putting that into a path that people can educate themselves on when they onboard is something that is invaluable. And I would state that it's actually something you can't even do in an in-office environment. You have to either re-interview everyone or have lunches with people to really get that insight. But we make it very, to use the word again, intentional relative to the role at hand. So if you're a legal professional joining Toptal, a lawyer who's going to do contract deals with us on the commercial side, we're going to have an onboarding process for you that's going to be tailored towards the more legal side of Toptal. What is it like to work with me if something's going to escalate to me? What is it like to work with our general counsel? We'll have some videos that speak to that. You'll really get a good understanding as to who you're going to be working with and what each one of those individuals is like in a specific context. And that's really what matters in a work environment. You don't want to know what it's like to go out to lunch with me. You don't want to know what it's like to go for a jog with me. You want to know what it's like to work with me. And specifically, You want to know what it's like to work with me on legal challenges.
Mm.
Am I a person who overstates things with knowing about the law, or am I a person who has no idea what they're talking about and I'll defer to you every single time, or somewhere in between, right? You want to get a sense of that during your onboarding process, and you want to contextualize it for the person relative to their job. And I think that's really what gives people a unique experience within Toptal, because we do that really well. We don't actually do that for all jobs, but we do that for a fair amount of jobs. And then we have our general onboarding, which gives you some good context into what is it like working with me in general? What is it like working with our executive team, our SLT team in general? And so we've recently hired a director of L&D who is very proficient at doing precisely what I described at scale. And we're rolling out more and more personalized onboarding programs per role so that we can do precisely what I just described, which can be very powerful.
Yeah, I think the key of what you just said is the context, right? It's not one size fits all. It's not, one training for every single employee because people have different roles. People might be a manager, people might be, individual contributor working in different functions. So you really can contextualize it so they're getting exactly what they need. And from all the leaders I've talked to, onboarding virtually has been beneficial in the sense where you can really optimize the process. And a lot of people don't like onboarding from the employee perspective. They think, oh, it's tedious. I have to go through all this, and it's going to take me, a month to get, acquainted with people and the work that I need to do and learn the ropes. But it can really make things more efficient and get people to be a fully functional employee quicker.
I would 100% agree with that. And I have a lot of feedback from executives and SLT members, even individual contributors, directly to me in writing that states Toptal is the best onboarding experience they've ever had in their entire life, professional career. And so I know if we can do it, lots of companies can do it. We're not some sort of PhDs in onboarding here. We are relatively well educated, driven, smart people who have constructed this, and it's not even our main focus. So if we can do it, I'm sure lots of companies can do it at our level, and I'm sure there will be companies out there that even bring it to the next level.
What do you recommend for companies that are not fully remote to effectively transition to either hybrid or a fully remote work environment?
Well, hybrid work is a challenge unto itself because you have the disconnect problem. I'm sure someone will coin a term or some catchphrase will take off that has to do with this problem, but it is the linchpin of hybrid work, which is somebody is in a room, you're at home, and you miss the conversation. Or you're talking fluidly with everyone in a room, the person online can't hear you, can't see you. And so in the room, there's camaraderie. Holistically, there's not. There's that element of disconnect that exists in a hybrid work environment that doesn't exist in both an in-office environment and a fully remote environment. So you have a unique challenge in the hybrid workplace model, which is very unique, though pronounced. And so how companies deal with this, I think, is probably the most challenging in the hybrid work model because there's not a lot of great solutions to deal with these problems. Currently, Logitech and some other companies are building whiteboards and working to integrate them with Zoom and, let's say, hybrid workifying or hybridizing, however you want to say, offices to be able to fold into this new paradigm. However, that is in its very early days. The cameras that exist on the market to be able to hybridize, let's say, your environment, your work environment, I'm not sure, and I'm quite literally not sure how good they are. I'm not sure if they work really well, if they don't work really well, if they capture everything that's being said in the room to a degree that's acceptable or don't. I still think there's a lot of case studies that have brought out this element. I haven't seen a YouTube video. I haven't heard even from a person firsthand, secondhand, etc., of someone stating, "Yeah, this is excellent. This is awesome. You should see this office that has been set up for hybrid work, and everyone loves it." I just haven't seen it. Now, I think it's a big opportunity, but I think it's just something that's missing right now in the market because it doesn't exist. So, it's a huge challenge because it has a lot of physical elements that are involved, and then you have to connect up all those different elements to a remote work environment. It's almost like going through the 90s again of networking gear, but this time it's not networking gear, it's camera gear. It's cameras, whiteboards, all needing to be threaded and woven for the purposes of this hybrid work experience in the physical realm
Yeah.
through the remote realm. So that sort of challenge is still something very real. In the remote work environment, it's much more straightforward. And so, I don't think there's much to say there because I think the remote work environment just works extremely well. But there's this big challenge in the hybrid work experience. So, we can discuss either. Though
Yeah,
that's
absolutely. I think that there's going to be a lot of experimentation over the next year, but there will be more and more technologies that come out. There'll be more, leaders who perform experiments using their workforce to see, what's going to work, what's not going to work. So it'll figure itself out because there's enough pressure on companies to think it through and to at least try. How do you ensure that remote workers are accountable and aligned to your company's vision and mission and goals?
well, we've developed our own software to do that, but I would say the techniques that we use are not so proprietary to us, though we have, like many companies, created our own flavor of it. And so we use OKRs, RACEs, we have our own org charts, of course. We have all these different elements as they pertain to how Toptal operates at an organizational level. And so those are all very well defined. We have yearly and quarterly planning to both review what has been done for the quarter and the year, and then to plan what we're going to do for a given year or quarter. And so we probably use what the majority of companies use in terms of the basic tools, though we've perfected it really by developing software that allows each person to know who's responsible for what within the organization, tie those to goals. When I say tie those to goals, I mean tie initiatives to goals. People know who the initiative owners are. It's all very clear and very linked together so that anyone joining Toptal can see very clearly how our goals are formulated, who owns what goal, how the initiatives relate to a given set of goals, who owns those and what teams they're running as a byproduct of owning these specific initiatives or projects or sub projects at hand. It's all very well crafted, but it's in a system that is probably more set up for remote work than it is not, given the fact that a lot of these elements are well understood in an in-office environment. We didn't have that general understanding, and tools like Jira or Miro or any of the project management related tools were more so either for strict project management or strict product management, not really organizational management, which was really a element of running a company unto itself. And so we built our own tools to be able to craft goals, have those goals linked to the initiatives, have those initiatives linked to who owns them, and then have those owners linked to which teams they run.
Yeah, it makes sense to use a lot of technology in these new tools and even develop your own if you can to be able to orchestrate a remote workforce so you can measure their work, you can get them accountable for their goals, you can promote values, your mission, your vision. It's, companies are investing way more in technology than they were before because COVID put the pressure on them to do so, right? And so because you already had the remote workforce, it's now this ongoing development of new tools to be able to ensure that you're creating a seamless experience for all your employees. And what advice would you give companies who are trying to embrace permanent remote work?
Do it. That's it.
What would be the first step to get that going, get that process going?
Sell your office, start working from home, and if you have any challenges, at least you can go to bed knowing that you're saving a lot of money in real estate expense.
Yeah, I think the best way to get behind a new way of working is to try it yourself, right? Like anything else. And so if you like remote work, other people will probably like remote work as well. And what do you think the future is for remote work?
It is the future. No doubt. That is the truth. And the talent themselves will speak for that. They will just leave their companies if a company is going to make them go into an office. It is as simple as that. And over the next 10 years, companies will either just disappear because new companies will be formed that are the same companies as those companies, but with everyone working remotely. And so they'll just do the same thing, but compete by having the most competent people all work from home. And the other companies won't attract them anymore. Or something else in regards to remote work will happen where, those companies will just be forced to change.
Yeah. No, it's definitely forcing change. I don't think anyone would question that. And, companies are going to be competing based on who offers flexibility now. That has gone all the way to the top. Safety, security, flexibility, healthcare benefits, learning and development opportunities for employee benefits. So that is what companies are going to be competing on. And with more and more companies like yours offering permanent and full-time remote work, it's going to put pressure on larger competitors and just big companies in general to get their act together.
Oh,
So
yeah.
David has a better chance against Goliath in this way.
Yeah. I guess David's working from home.
Exactly. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives, Tasso.
Thank you.